In this module, we will discuss fertilization of turf on roadsides. To understand the basics of turf fertilization, it is important for us to discuss why turf is fertilized. Turf, like all other plants, needs nutrients to grow and develop. In most cases, the soil will not provide all of the turf plant's required nutrients, and for this reason, it is important to understand proper fertilization practices to maintain the functional and aesthetic quality of turf on roadsides. Another reason why we fertilize is because we want to make the turf more competitive against weeds and other pests. In the case of roadsides, undesirable plants can thrive or outcompete turf on depleted or stress-prone soils if the turf is not managed properly. The photo on your screen is an image of a turf establishment that was seeded a few weeks prior to the photo being taken. An insufficient amount of fertilizer was applied during establishment. The chlorotic, inconsistent yellow-green patches of turf indicate that this stand needs more nitrogen. The amount of fertilizer that needs to be applied is determined by many factors that we will discuss shortly. In most agricultural systems, fertilizer programs can be fine-tuned to provide an amount that optimizes the cost of the fertilizer application with the crop yield. This approach does not work in turf because we do not have a yield goal, and our fertilizer rates are mostly determined by aesthetics and function of the turf stand. Before we begin discussing how much fertilizer turf may require or how to apply it, we must first go over some general nutrient information. As was mentioned previously, all plants require nutrients for growth and development. We refer to these as essential elements because they are essential for the plant to complete its normal life cycle. Each of the essential elements have a unique role in the plant's growth, metabolism, or reproduction and cannot be replaced by another element. There are 17 essential elements for all plants, and turf grasses are no exception. Even though all are ultimately required, they vary in how much the plant needs. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are required the most by plants, and each of these the plant is able to obtain through the uptake of air and water. The second most elements in demand by the plant include nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and are called primary macronutrients. The plant is able to obtain much of these through the soil, with the remaining balance supplied through fertilizer. The next group of elements are called secondary macronutrients and include calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. The plant is able to obtain most of these through the soil, but in the cases of soil deficiencies, they can be supplied by fertilizer just like primary macronutrients. The final elements grouped by importance are called micronutrients, and these include the elements boron, chlorine, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, and zinc. Micronutrients are rarely deficient in soil conditions, but when necessary, can be supplied for plant uptake through granular or foliar fertilizers. This is an example of a fertilizer label. Fertilizers are commonly referred to by their analysis of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are indicated as percentages at or near the top of the fertilizer label. This fertilizer is a 22-2-10, where 22 indicates the percent of total nitrogen, 2 indicates the percent of available phosphate phosphorus, and 10 indicates the percent soluble potash potassium. Please note that not all fertilizer sources will have sulfur or iron. With the exception of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which plants can naturally obtain through the air and water, nitrogen is the most essential element for plants. As a result, fertilizer programs are based around supplying a sufficient level of nitrogen. Nitrogen is required for all plant functions. In turf, the level of nitrogen affects root and shoot growth, turf density and color, the rate the turf can recover from injury, and the turf plant's susceptibility to disease. When contemplating fertilizer applications, it is important to consider the potential fate of nitrogen in a turfgrass system. We can think of these fates as nitrogen being added to or subtracted from the system. A fertilizer application is the most common form of a nitrogen addition. Mineralization is a process where soil microbes process organic forms of nitrogen already in the soil into plant-available forms of nitrogen. Although nitrogen is a primary component of our atmosphere, only a small amount is deposited to the soil via atmospheric deposition. Returning clippings to a turfgrass stand with each mowing is an important practice for conserving nitrogen and is also considered a nitrogen addition. Nitrogen subtractions are processes that are reducing the amount of nitrogen available for the turf plants to use. Removing or collecting clippings when mowing can remove as much as 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year and is a significant loss of nitrogen. Nitrogen immobilization is a decrease in nitrogen availability to plants as soil microbes convert the plant available forms into unavailable organic forms of nitrogen. Leaching is the loss of nitrogen from the soil as water drains through the soil. Ammonia volatilization is a process in which nitrogen is lost to the atmosphere as nitrogen is converted from a urea form to ammonia gas. Nitrification is a transfer of plant-available nitrate nitrogen in the soil to a nitrogen gas. The additions and subtractions of nitrogen are generally natural processes that are all part of the soil nitrogen cycle. Being familiar with the cycle is an important part of responsibly applying fertilizer. Nitrogen fertilizer sources have traditionally been categorized as being quick or slow-release fertilizers. Many fertilizer products contain a combination of both quick and slow-release sources. This illustration helps to visualize how quick and slow-release nitrogen fertilizers affect plant growth over time. The red-colored quick-release nitrogen curve results in a short-term flush of growth, followed by a short release of nitrogen available to plants. Slow-release nitrogen fertilizers, indicated by the blue line, provide a slower release of nitrogen that allows for a more gradual growth response from plants. Many fertilizer products contain a combination of both quick and slow-release nitrogen fertilizer forms in the same bag to provide a best-of-both-worlds approach. Quick-release fertilizers are known to have a high affinity for moisture and are considered to be water-soluble. Their high solubility and chemical structure allow them to be immediately available for uptake by plants. This results in a rapid greening or growth response, which can happen in under 10 days. A consequence of their high solubility is that quick-release fertilizers have a short soil residual, meaning they generally do not last more than 30 days in the soil. Another disadvantage of quick-release fertilizers is that they have a higher chance of leaf injury. This is sometimes referred to as burn potential and vary based on weather conditions, fertilizer source, or turfgrass species. One reason why quick-release fertilizers are commonly used is that they are generally less expensive to apply per unit of nitrogen. Some common examples of quick-release nitrogen fertilizers are urea, ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, and potassium nitrate. One disadvantage of quick-release fertilizers is that because it is so quickly released and taken up by the plant, it may cause flushes of growth, as depicted by this picture. Slow-release nitrogen fertilizers are water insoluble. They often require some processing from either moisture or soil organisms for them to be made available for uptake by plants. As a result, they often have a controlled and/or slower release compared to the quick-release fertilizers. Slow-release fertilizers have a lower chance of leaf or burn injury. The added manufacturing process, as well as proprietary technology, results in a generally more expensive product per unit of nitrogen. Slow-release fertilizers is a broad category describing several quite unique sources. Slow-release fertilizers can further be categorized based on their manufacturing process into 3 groups: coated products, synthetic slow-release, and natural organics and biosolids. The 2 most common examples of coated products are sulfur-coated urea and polymer-coated urea. Examples of synthetic slow-release fertilizers include methylene urea and urea formaldehyde. The natural organics and biosolid products are typically plant or animal-based products, and some common examples include milorganite, poultry manure, and corn gluten. Like nitrogen, phosphorus is an essential nutrient that is required for many plant processes. Although it is an essential nutrient for nearly all plant functions, it is needed in smaller quantities compared to other macronutrients. Phosphorus availability to turf plants is most important at establishment, primarily because of its nature in soil. Phosphorus is less mobile in soil, so plants that have less developed root systems, such as turf seedlings, have difficulty accessing this phosphorus. As a result, many starter fertilizers used at establishment will have higher amounts of plant-available phosphate, such as with a 12-24-14 fertilizer. Some depleted roadsides may have a phosphorus deficiency. Phosphorus has been implicated in causing algal blooms in surface water. Some states, like Minnesota, have created laws to restrict unnecessary uses of phosphorus in fertilizers to reduce this form of pollution. In the state of Minnesota, a person may not apply fertilizer containing phosphorus to turf unless it meets at least one of the 4 exemptions: a tissue or soil test performed within the last 3 years indicating a phosphorus deficiency, they are establishing turfgrass via seed or sod, they are using the fertilizer on a golf course under the direction of a person who has participated in an ongoing phosphorus training program, or the turf is to be used for sod production. Some common examples of phosphorus fertilizer sources include monoammonium phosphate, diammonium phosphate, superphosphate, or triple superphosphate. Potassium is the second most needed nutrient by turf grasses. Potassium is associated with stress tolerance, and its deficiency may be more pronounced under heat, drought, cold, moisture, or salinity stresses. Although many soils have sufficient levels of potassium, stresses may induce a potassium deficiency. Turf that is exposed to certain stresses such as wear, cold, heat, or drought may require more potassium. Some examples of common potassium fertilizer sources include potassium chloride, potassium sulfate, potassium nitrate, or slow-release potassium carriers. This ends part 1 of this presentation. Continue to part 2 to continue watching.